Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast where we help you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and I hope you and your families had a wonderful Easter over the weekend and enjoyed plenty of the footy. It was a long round 6, so long in fact that it's still going. That's right, I'm recording this just before the Cats and the Hawks do battle today on Easter Monday. The round started all the way back on Thursday night, where we saw the Magpies flexing their muscle over the reigning champs Brisbane. I went away with the family, which was great this weekend. Great because I had enough reception and internet to still catch some of the footy, including being able to watch my Crows hold off the Giants in what was a strange old game of footy. Very low scoring, very scrappy, but very important. The Crows got a win against a good side. Also got to see a little bit of the end of the Tigers' impressive win on Saturday night, where they held on for dear life in that last quarter as the Suns came roaring home. And there were a couple of blowouts. We're seeing a lot of blowouts this year, I must say, but none more disappointing than North Melbourne on Good Friday. They didn't get near it in the second half against the Blues. And then St Kilda on Sunday night put up one of the most one-sided second quarters I can recall seeing, as the Bulldogs just dismantled them in every aspect of the game, except for the scoreboard. They didn't kill them on the scoreboard, but they did in the second half. Lots of soul-searching for the Saints this week. But what did I notice in the fantasy world? Well, geez, there was a lot going on. I think the big topic this week is something that's created a lot of discussion on X, and that is the rolling lockout. Probably more relevant to the classic formats, but just with the way just some of the subs this week were really, really challenging, frustrating. But in keeper leagues and draft leagues, you do have the opportunity to choose as a league whether you go with the rolling lockout or if you go with the first Saturday game lockout, or even a Thursday, Friday lockout. It's completely up to you. Very interested in what leagues do. What's your preference? I like the rolling lockout. I know it keeps me maybe more engaged on my phone than I would like to be on the weekend sometimes, but I like the flexibility and the strategy that comes with it. Anyway, on to what I noticed this week, in the things I noticed across the weekend, and it does start Thursday night, where the talk of the town was Collingwood, and more specifically, the performance of one Nick Dacos. Now, he just fell short of winning the Player of the Week for Finders Keepers this week, but look, there's not much that really needs to be said. I just wanted to talk about him because it was a pretty lackluster game in a fantasy sense. It was really just Nick Dacos and then the rest. And I just wanted to remind everyone, there's some people like to criticise him, say he's not hard enough at the footy or that he flops. I think the thing that can get lost in any conversation about Nick Dacos is the fact that he's 22 years old. This is his 4th season, and he is doing things that are just well beyond his years. So I have absolutely no doubt we are watching one of, if not the best players that we are likely to see in our times, in the fantasy world as well as the real footy world, which I guess some of us care about still. Nothing much else going on in that game. I really like the look of Paul Curtis for North Melbourne. He's just quietly going about having a nice season, this guy. He's also in his 4th year. He's kicked multiple goals in every game this season, which is something I like. But I don't know, just watching him, there's something about him. I can't really think of a player that I could compare him to. But I just love his hands. I love his smarts around his positioning. And I feel like he's the sort of guy that if and when, or maybe if North Melbourne improve, I think they're improving. But if we see North Melbourne become a much more competitive side week to week, pushing for finals, I just think Paul Curtis would be a great player to own. So it might not necessarily be this year, but as a forward, I think he's someone that in a few years we might look back on and say, yeah, there were some really good signs particularly when North were at their lowest ebb. George Wardlaw's return, I think, is something that would give North fans some hope and put a bit of a smile on their face, and keeper owners would be absolutely delighted. I know his score was only a 60, but watching his attack on the footy, watching his ability to win the hard ball was really quite impressive for such a young player who's missed a fair bit of footy now. To hit the ground running, I think he's only going to get better, as you'd hope North would too. Dylan Stephens has put back-to-back decent games together now. A couple of good scores now in a row, playing on a wing. We've waited a very long time for Dylan Stephens to be relevant and in the keeper conversation. He was such a high draft pick. He had such good fantasy pedigree, but it never quite happened at Sydney, and it just hasn't taken off yet at North. But look, it's never too late. It's his 6th season, and I think that spot on the wing, particularly with Bailey Scott being omitted, I think is Dylan Stephens for now. So if he can just keep doing what he's doing, keep chipping away, I think he can lock in a best 22 spot, and I think he could be quite handy. Tom Powell, oh boy, that huge round 1 score seems a long time ago now for owners, I'm sure. I still like him. I still love him. I still think he's going to be a jet, but Wardlaw's return did see a bit of a dip in Powell's CBAs, and his scoring has just kind of slowly been going down since that hot sort of round 1, round 2 start he had. I think he'll be fine. I think he'll get going again. He probably represents North in many ways this year. Started the year pretty optimistically, and then the last few weeks it's felt a little bit like same old, but I have faith in him. I think he'll bounce back sooner rather than later. And for Carlton, Mitch McGovern, it was a great call last week from our special guest, Geordie DeSena, who had put McGovern up as a great option on the waiver wires, playing on a Friday, perfect loophole option, and scored a nice 89 as Carlton, really owned the footy against North. What's really interesting, though, is McGovern had sort of stood out to Geordie last week because of a huge amount of kick-ins he'd had the week before. And then this week, 0 kick-ins, and yet still scored really well. So it's funny how much we look at CBAs and kick-ins and that sort of metric as a bit of a guide for whether a player is going to score well or not. And then how funny when a player scores really well and then you look, he's had no kick-ins. So sometimes it's hard to pick, and sometimes with the kick-ins you're better off receiving the kick-in because the +6 is better than +3. West Coast and Essendon. Oh, West Coast fans, I feel for you. So close to getting their first win. But credit to Essendon, who really had to win, and they found a way. And a big part of that was the return of Peter Wright. Whooshka, 6 goals. Huge game. And there's a bit going on with Essendon, with the devastating injury that Sam Draper has suffered, an Achilles, I think. So season over for him. And just as he was looking really good in that number 1 ruck spot for the Bombers, he's just picked up forward status, depending on which DPPs your league uses. It's just a disaster. But it's really bad for him too, because he is out of contract, and there's lots of talk of him potentially getting a big contract to come back to Adelaide. And, it's hard for him now, coming off an Achilles, certainly to demand the same sort of contract that he would have if he'd played out this year in the number 1 spot. So thoughts to him. I hope he recovers well. But what does that mean for the Essendon ruck line? As you know, Nick Bryan went down the week before with an ACL, and now that leaves old man Goldie. Todd Goldstein is still on the list, and I think we'll see him come in this week as the number 1 ruck. Zach Reed, who went into the ruck to cover for Draper in that last quarter, I don't think that happens again. I think we see Goldstein come in and Peter Wright will be his chop out. Will Setterfield has hit 2 tons since returning to the senior squad, and he's just a great player to own. He's a tackling machine and he can score while tagging, which he did on the weekend. He was tagging Tim Kelly and he just tackles his way to the ton. He's a perfect player to have. For West Coast, Matty Flynn, he lives. Finally, we see Flynn get another go as the number 1 ruck at West Coast, and I thought he made a real fist of it. I thought he played pretty well, and I just can't see how he's not their number 1 from now on. Bailey Williams offers plenty, but I just think he's better as a forward. So Williams was out omitted. We may see him come in this week, but I don't know. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe I'm just stubborn on this, but I just still think Matt Flynn should be their number 1. And, if he does, I think he's got a decent average in him, at least 75, 80 range, maybe more. And he's only 27. The other Eagle I really liked was Elijah Hewitt, who had a big second half, had plenty of centre bounces, and he's had such a stop-start career so far, and even this year where we were really expecting him to be fit and break out, and it was a really interesting option even in the classic formats with his forward status. But again, he's had issues that just have not allowed him on the park. But on the weekend, I thought he looked really good, and I think if he can stay fit, this is the time he gets going. And I think a guy like that, and I'll talk about him maybe in the waiver wire pickup segment, a guy like that though, if he's around, I'd be jumping quick. The next day we saw the D's get a much needed win over the Dockers in Melbourne, and Trent Rivers, what a great game from him. Still no midfield time, which I still can't fully understand, but he just did as he pleased in defence and scored over 120 for just the 3rd time in his career. And hopefully for owners, that's the start of a really big run from him, because he's had some stinkers this year. Perhaps if there's no more of this, okay, you're half-back, okay, now you're midfield and flip-flopping, maybe if they just make a call and keep him in the back line, we'll see the consistent scoring again. Cozzy Pickett, what a game and what a season he's having. He's only played the 3 games because he had that suspension, but he is just looking brilliant. He's coming in to the midfield, often starting at the centre bounce for impact and then drifting forward. He kicked 5 goals on the weekend. I mean, that's obviously not going to happen every week, but gee, any guy that's playing a bit of midfield that can kick 5 goals, yes please. I love what he's doing, and I think anyone who persevered with him through what has been a roller coaster ride, to say the least, looking at his last couple of years, he really has. Every time he's looked like showing something, he's then got suspended or has just gone to a forward pocket and scored bugger all for a game and probably cost you a league victory. But those who held firm, or anyone that jumped on him this year, I reckon we're definitely starting to see what he can do, and hopefully he keeps doing it. And Melbourne fans will be hoping he does it for them beyond this year, because there is a lot of talk of him potentially leaving at the end of 2025. Freo have got a guy, I don't know a lot about him, Kyle Warner, but 2 weeks in a row now he's really caught my eye as someone that's scoring really well, but scoring in bursts as well. So his marks have gone through the roof. So I wonder if he's taking a bit of that, Luke Ryan +6 action, or is he intercepting a lot? I'm not sure. I need to watch Freo a bit closer, but I reckon just keep an eye on him. His scoring hasn't gone berserk, but just watch him this week. Watch the role, and is the sort of guy I reckon you want to jump on before he scores a 90 or a ton, just so you can have him before everyone comes looking for him. The Crows game, like I said, was Just a weird game. The first half was played like it was really wet, but the rain didn't come till the second half. Anyway, very difficult game, and unfortunately, Kieran Briggs had a pretty rare stinker, it must be said. Very disappointing game. Didn't take any marks, which, the conditions weren't there for big men, but just completely outplayed by Riley O'Brien, who had his best game of the year and really good timing. He needed to put in a good one for the Crows, and yeah, he was great. He took 4 marks, which I think is plenty for him, but it's just really impressive in that weather to take the 4 marks. But it did crack me up. The commentators, every time he took a mark and then he'd kick it, the commentators every time said, great mark, but kicking's just not his thing, which I just don't think, as an AFL footballer, whether you're a ruckman or not, that is the sort of thing you want said about you every time you kick the footy. Anyway, that's just how it goes. But great game from him, really impressive. And Kieran Briggs owners, it was a shocker. I'd be surprised if he put in a poor game like that again anytime soon. On to Saturday night, where the Tigers upset the Suns, which was just great to see. Great to see a young side get some reward for effort. And who'd have thought Richmond already have 2 wins for the year, which is brilliant for them, considering they only had 2 for the whole of last year. So that rebuild is coming along nicely, and I don't think the Suns lost too many fans as a result. I mean, they had to drop one eventually. Nick Vlaston, huge performance from the veteran. Just absolutely swallowed up anything Gold Coast put into their forward 50. Took a ton of marks, had a huge score. I think at half-time he was tracking for a ginormous score, but I think he must have slowed in the second half, and having Noah Bolter back in would have helped him. Also, the very surprise sub announcement of Luke Traynor, which sent the classic world into a tailspin. But from a keeper perspective too, I thought it was a bit strange. Potentially it was because Bolter was back in. Maybe Traynor was a bit tired. I don't know, but it certainly wasn't on form or anything like that, because he's been almost a revelation back there. So yeah, with him as a sub, Floston absolutely dominated, and I'll be really interested to see what that makeup looks like next week for the Tigers. I'd be very surprised if Traynor was the sub again. For the Gold Coast, Sam Flanders is really struggling to get going this year, which would be very frustrating for owners, because he's a real marquee player in a keeper league, just with his age and what he was able to do across the last couple of years. But I don't know, he had a slow start with injury to the year, but he's been playing every week for a bit now, and he's just not having impact, certainly not scoring. And even on Saturday night, he just didn't appear to have much midfield time or even half-back time, sort of looking more like a wing, half-forward. Not sure, but if I owned him, I'd want to see something this week, just so I can feel a bit better about things, because he's yet to really give us a big score this year. Another guy struggling over for Sydney in their loss to Port Adelaide, Chad Warner. This is just another guy, he's just can't get into this season. And they're pretty similar age, actually, him and Flanders, so maybe we should cut them a bit more slack. But Warner, he's had his time forward, but he's had plenty of midfield time, especially on the weekend. He's just not scoring, so frustrating for owners. Again, depending on what DPPs your league uses, the dual position players, he has forward status now, which, mitigates the poor scoring, but at the same time, come on, Chad. We know how good you can be. Connor Rozee, he continued his new halfback role, which was somewhat of a revelation last week. Certainly took me by surprise. And what was really interesting and impressive about this was he had James Jordan tagging him early in the game. And James Jordan, he's been quite a good tagger the last few years. Last couple of weeks, though, Nick Dacos, he didn't really affect him in any way. And now this week, Rosie looked to be doing fine, even with the tag, and then they released the tag. So, yeah, interesting what's happening with James Jordan. But back to Rosie, he took 4 kick-ins, had a few CBAs this week, which was different to last year, but I don't know. I reckon this is exciting. If you've got him, I think defender status is, a real show. We'll see what the next few weeks looks like, but he's been at half-back for 2 weeks, and Port have had 2 very impressive wins. Sunday night saw the Bulldogs absolutely take it to St Kilda for a big win. And there was actually plenty of discussion points from this game, starting with this week's winner of the Finders Keepers Player of the Week. Riley Sanders. What a performance. A breakout game for sure. 31 disposals, 11 marks, 4 tackles, and a goal. And a first career fantasy ton. And here's the kicker. This is what I was saying earlier about kick-ins and scoring. He did it all with 0 CBAs. He didn't attend a single centre bounce. And Bontempelli's return, I reckon, is the reason for that, pushing him out. But it didn't matter. He just absolutely brained it. He was everywhere. And, it's exciting for Sanders owners. I've felt the frustration from people about him. But again, he's a second-year player. It's going to take time. And when you watch a game like that, a career game clearly, but when you watch a game like that, you just think, this guy is going to be a fantasy gun for a long time once he gets to a more consistent level. Awesome signs from him, though, on the weekend. And just touching on Bontempelli, I don't have to tell you how good a player he is, but wasn't it just great to see him? St Kilda fans might disagree, but I think most footy fans would agree it was great to see him come back and not only return from injury and ease into things, just absolutely killed it. Looked brilliant. Those goals in the second quarter, I think it was, almost hairs on the back of the neck stuff. And I'm not a Bulldogs fan, but I'm a footy fan. And Bontempelli, he's a ripper. Good to have him back. Now, it wasn't all good news for the Bulldogs from an injury point of view. I think everyone was pretty flat after hearing the news that Sam Darcy had gone down with, anyone who saw it immediately would have been able to say that doesn't look good, with a suspected ACL injury to, one of the most exciting players in the comp. But there is some good news. The scans came back and he's avoided an ACL, but he's going to be out for a very, very long time. And it's just a shame. He was looking so good, and it's going to hurt the doggies, clearly, in their quest for finals footy. But just, such a relief that it's not an ACL, and we should be able to see him, maybe, if all goes well, still in this season. But crisis creates opportunity, and Aaron Naughton needs a real kick to get going again. His career is stalled, and he's just struggled. But the moment Darcy went down, he just looked like someone who was like, right, this forward 50 belongs to me now. And he looked really, really good. Had a big game. He still dropped some marks he should have taken. He still missed some shots at goals that he just shouldn't miss. But we know this with Naughton. He's a bit of a mixed bag, but his best is bloody good. And I think if that's any sort of silver lining that may come from the Darcy injury, it could be that Naughton rediscovers a bit of what made him such a great player. The Saints, that was a real down game for them. Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, they just trying to use him everywhere. He was used at centre bounces this week, which isn't something that I can remember really seeing with him, certainly not often. And I just think Saints were trying anything. So they put him in the guts, and he was okay. I still think he's suited off half-back where he was playing for most of the game. Just interesting when a player gets kick-ins and CBAs in the one game. It tells you a bit about just how important they are to that club. The captain, Jack Steele, I don't really know what to say about that performance from him. I'm kind of hoping he's carrying an injury or something. I'm sure he is. I've been a massive Jack Steele fan. I've owned him in my keeper side for the longest of times. And a lot of people sort of said to me this year, you know, I think he's going to regress a bit, but I thought he still had something in him, particularly with the additions of Jack McRae and just a bit more support around him. But yeah, it's hard to pick on him because the Bulldogs, you know, absolutely smashed him all over the park. But Steele just looked slow, almost like the game is starting to pass him. And I can't have that. He's still too young for that. So we'll see. I'm not sure, but he had a stinker and he didn't look near it. And then Rowan Marshall is another fantasy stud who just 3 weeks in a row has put up really underwhelming scores. And I just wonder if he's still carrying issues from that big preseason injury he had. And I don't know. I'm not sure what's happening there, but I do think it's 3 weeks in a row he's pretty much been soundly beaten. I think we'll see Boyd play next week. They play Brisbane. McInerney's always a very good opponent. I just reckon Boyd, he's been emergency nearly every week. I reckon we'll see him again. And that's what I noticed across round 6. Always lots of discussion points, lots of things to look at. Did I miss anything? I probably did. I didn't watch all the games. But if I missed anything obvious, well, you got some thoughts about some of the players I've talked about, and maybe you can give me a bit more intel on why they're not performing or why they are performing. Drop us a line on X at FindKeepAFL. Come find the Finders Keepers page and send me a message or put a comment down. Let me know what you're thinking about the pod. On to the waiver wires for this week. I've got 5 names who I think, if they're available in your leagues, they're worth putting a waiver pick in. The first one is Peter Wright. Now, it's easy to just fall in love with a player when they come in and kick 6 goals. I'm more interested in him for the ruck support role that he's going to have to play now with the back-to-back injuries to Nick Bryan and Sam Draper. I think that means Todd Goldstein comes in and Wright continues to play as a key forward who chops out in the ruck. And, you know, he's not going to kick 6 every week, but he can kick a bag, and that was obvious on the weekend. Elijah Hewitt is another guy that I'm very keen on. He has forward status, and that's the appeal, obviously, for this year. But I like his role in the midfield at West Coast. I think they just have to keep playing him, keep giving him a go. I really liked his second half on the weekend against Essendon. He looked probably as good as I've seen him look, and fingers crossed he can really go on with it from here. Dylan Stephens is another one he's probably more a hit and hope. I just think if it does turn for him, he's a good player to have. Matt Flynn, I've talked about him before. I think he's the number 1 ruck. He should be. And if you're looking at your ruck stocks and you've got a guy that you're worried is towards the end or you don't have good cover, if Flynn's available, he's 27 and I think his scoring could be, I said it earlier, I don't see why he doesn't score 80s at the very least as a number 1 ruck. And then the last one is Aaron Norton, who I reckon would be still owned in many leagues, but the sort of player that's probably on and off lists because his name suggests something. But yeah, he's been frustrating the last couple of years. But again, that Sam Darcy injury could change things for him. And if he catches fire, he's a guy that can really score well, and the Bulldogs will be hoping that happens. All right, let's go to the listener questions for this week, and then we'll wrap up what's been a big episode of Finders Keepers. I've only got the 2 questions to go through today, but they are big ones. There is a lot of trading going on in these questions, and there's a lot to dissect. So the first one I'll start with is from @NicholasDavis86, and Nick writes, "This mega trade went through in grand final week in 2022 between me, looking to exploit a grand finalist, and a grand finalist looking to increase their chances. The grand finalist would then go on to win the grand final, and our league would then change the rules around trading during finals. Here's the trade. Team A receives Tom Lynch, Dion Prestia, Dane Zorko, Toby Nankervis, Josh Dacos, Alex Witherden. Team B receives Daniel Rich, Andrew Gaff, Jack Graham, Jordan Ridley, Caleb Sarong. So it's a 6-for-5 deal. And the first thing I'll say is that is a ridiculous trade for grand final week. And I'll be honest, this is actually my home league. Nick's a good mate of mine who's put this through. We were talking about this trade recently, so I thought he's obviously thought it'd be fun to bring it up here. Now, I was the other grand finalist in that conversation, and I lost. So I was a little bit frustrated that a team was able to pretty much trade a third of their starting squad in grand final week. And yeah, as a result, we've cut trading pretty much from finals entirely, which I think is more in line with most Keeper Dynasty leagues. I know a lot of leagues generally cut off trading well before the finals even start. So this will sound like a crazy trade for those. But let's look at it. Out of those names still playing is Tom Lynch, Prestia, Zorko, Nank, Josh Dacos, Jack Graham, Ridley, Sarong. So I think the side that received the 6 players, Infinity Rangers is the team name, they got Nankervis, who's been a really good ruck in the years since, Dane Zorko, who I'm not sure if would still have been held on that list because this was a couple of years before he went bang in that new half-back role. Tom Lynch, Dion Prestia, just injuries, nothing exciting there. Josh Dacos would have been a great guy to have the last few years, now has defender status. And Alex Witherden, who's no longer on a list. And then for the Wonderbolts, who received the other half of the trade, which was Daniel Rich, Andrew Gaff, Jack Graham, Jordan Ridley, Caleb Sarong. I think there's one name that stands out of those 5 as being worth the trade, and that's Sarong. So for Nick to get his hands on Sarong 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, just before he became a out-and-out primo, I think is a win for Nick. But on the other side, Nankervis and Dacos probably add more as a collective for the other side. I just think it's a huge trade. I think both have come out pretty well. One got a premiership and the other got Caleb Sarong. So I think looking back, both teams would be pretty happy with it. Have you ever seen a trade like that in grand final week? Let me know. Send it through if you have, because that is bonkers, and I'm glad we don't trade in finals anymore because, yeah, that's outrageous. Thanks for sending that through, Nico. I know you are treasuring Caleb Sarong to this day, and that's why this trade probably sticks out for you. Now, one more before we finish the episode. I got a message on X from @JJ Simpson. So that's Josh Simpson, who sent me through a message with a heap of trade information from how busy he was in the off-season. So he writes, "Hey mate, enjoying the pod. Nice to hear a different voice talking Dynasty. Great work. I thought I'd send a few trades for you to just dissect if you feel the need. These were all done in a recent off-season in a 10-team Keep 19 league, as I have gone for a solid rebuild." Has he what? Have a listen to this. So he's pulled off 4 trades in his off-season heading into this year, and I'll just quickly go through them. So first trade, he sends Josh Dunkley for Lockie Ash and pick 2, which he then uses on Jagger Smith. Dunkley for Ash and Jagger Smith. He also sent George Wardlaw pick 4 and pick 5 for Jai Newcomb and pick 1, which he used on Ashcroft. He also sent Clayton Oliver and pick 17 for Colby McKercher and pick 8, which he turned into Langford. And then finally he sent Lockie Whitfield, LDU, picks 24, 114, 134, and receives Errol Goulden, pick 9, who he turns into Darcy Wilson, pick 19, turns into Jordan Sweet, and 29, who he used on Rowbottom. Wow, that is some serious trading from Josh, looking to completely rebuild his squad and just convert any current assets to future guys. It's just really cool to see such a huge upheaval of a list. So I won't go through all 4 trades individually and try and sort of pick out a winner. I think for the most part they're all win-wins. There's a lot of good names going one way, with a lot of good youth coming back the other way. But what I thought I'd do for you, Josh, and you know, I put together across the 4 trades you've done a list of players coming in and players going out. So then you can get a really big feel for the absolute transformation of Josh's squad. And what I'm also going to do is not mention the picks. I'm just going to say the names of what those picks turned into. So now we get a good feel of what names came in and went out. So leaving Josh's squad in the off-season was Josh Dunkley, George Wardlaw, Clayton Oliver, Lockie Whitfield, Luke Davies-Uniacke, Sid Draper, Josh Smiley, Dylan Shield, Will Setterfield, and a couple other later picks. Coming into his squad, Lockie Ash, Jai Newcomb, Colby McKercher, Errol Goulden, Levi Ashcroft, Jagger Smith, Harvey Langford, Darcy Wilson, Jordan Sweet, and James Rowbottom. Well done to you, Josh. I think you've turned a heap of guys, some old guys, some young, but just a heap of players into a group of players to come in that is going to set you up and keep your squad in good nick for the next 10 years. I just think it's really brilliant work, and it's hard to get trades done. It takes effort to put in the research to find out what the other coach needs on their squad. So to pull off 4 big trades like that, and all of them are big trades, big names involved, I think is a credit to you. Well done. And he also finishes with one. He's written one that's hurting in another league. So there's a trade he did in another league. He sent Jake Bowie for pick 43, which turned into Bodie Euland. And he felt that was around the mark during pre-season, but it just hurts more and more each week. Win some, lose some, and you rarely break even. Couldn't have said it any better myself. Thanks for sending in all that stuff, Josh. Well played, and thanks for the kind words and your support of the podcast. It's greatly appreciated. And that'll do it for another episode. It's been a big one again, so I feel like the episodes are getting bigger and bigger. Let me know your thoughts on the show, though. Reach me on Finders Keepers X page at FindKeepAFL. Let me know your thoughts on the pod if you're enjoying it so far, any feedback, and I just like hearing from the listeners, because it gives me a really good idea of what you want this pod to be. Like and subscribe if you are enjoying the pod. And what else? Send me your trade questions. How good were today's? That is just the stuff I love to talk about. So send in your trade questions, and thank you very much for listening to another episode. I'll be back same time next week with another episode of Finders Keepers. I hope you've had a great Easter and your belly's full of chocolate. And for the parents out there, I hope the kids are full of chocolate, all sugared up, ready for us to hand them over to their teachers as the second term of school begins. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to Geelong and Hawthorn, which I will watch later tonight. And as I said, I'll be back next week to review round 7. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.